Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, wistful, reflective, and awaiting the sun's ingress into Pisces, that nebulous sea of crises, where all of the wastage and ruination of the year just gone is washed away and cleansed as a baptism in preparation for the new astrological year ahead. This final heroic journey of the sun before it reaches the 0 point of Aries is a quest towards regeneration before emerging above the horizon to shine valiantly once again. But in order to truly commit to the rebirth that spring offers as a potential prophecy, we have to be willing to surrender and let go of all the attachments to things that have died and perished and been lost in the year that has just gone, to relinquish all the hopes and dreams that have only given up failed fruit so that we can mourn and grieve their passing in preparation for fresher pastures. In many ancient cosmologies, there was the belief in reincarnation or metempsychosis, the transmigration of the souls, the feeling that once we died, our soul descended to the underworld, where it underwent a period of healing and cleansing before it was ready to be embodied by a new soul. And I feel that Pisces in its solar journey is reflective and expressive of this purgatorial reimagining of the self. But in order to be reborn and to fully occupy the new form which life is going to lead us towards, we have to be willing to detach ourselves from the forms and structures to which we were once closely wedded and entwined. If a soul died and went to the underworld but refused to believe that it had died, refused to engage with the process of transmigration, then it would end up as a wandering ghost, as this fragment of its former self, forever haunting the purviews and purlieus of its old existence in the hopes of recapturing what was instead of embracing the process of discovering what might be. And this conundrum and crisis of conscience that is the friction between wanting to engage fully with the hopeful prospects of the future while still grieving and being emotionally attached to the past, to me is what Pisces and the sun's journey through it is all about. As in the other videos in which I've discussed this troubled, turbulent, mutable sign, Pisces is symbolized by the two fishes, one that swims upward, engaging towards life and the waters of the future, and one which is resisting that rebirth and pulling back towards the stagnant waters of the past. Now, this fish that pulls towards the past could be considered the source of nostalgia, which Pisces is so strongly aligned with. The past is very easy to idealize because it has gone from being a present experience in which we might find ourselves oppressed and overcome by all the difficulties that we are enraptured by in our present moment, and has instead become this kind of distant fantasy, this fragile melody that we once sung and can reimagine and recolor and retint now that it is just a memory. It's a bit like how once we film something, it becomes this piece of raw data that we can play with and manipulate to be very different from what it originally was. We can change the coloration, we can edit it, we can put different music over it to change the emotional tone that that imagery communicates. Likewise, when we are distanced from our memories, we can edit out the bits we don't like and choose just to hold on to those bits that reinforce the myth or fantasy that we are currently embodying. Now, the etymology of the word nostalgia could basically be translated as the pain of yearning for homecoming, of the divine homesickness of the soul, of the part of us that feels as though we have swum into strange alien waters, in which we are restless and yet becalmed, in which we feel very far removed from our roots in this 12th house sign of the zodiac, and we long for something that is familiar and safe and nourishing when we find ourselves so out to sea. And as when a stranger travels through a foreign land, it's easy to imagine the place you have come from as being this prelapsarian paradise, this garden before the fall of Eden, this place in which all goodness and beauty dwelt and all pain was an impossibility waiting in the barren arms of adulthood. But nostalgia can take root in many different forms. We can be nostalgic for the past experiences we've had, for the places that we've lived, for the lovers or relationships or friendships that we were once a part of, for periods of fertility or creativity that we once felt that are now removed from us, from depths of emotionality that now feel worn out and drained. Anything that we feel is now missing from our current life is a potential subject on which nostalgia can feed its fangs. But we can also feel nostalgic for things that haven't even happened in this lifetime. We can feel nostalgic for the lives we have never lived, or which perhaps we feel we have lived in other forms. And fantasy and sci-fi and mythology often plays upon this longing, but enable us to visit these worlds that perhaps we feel very viscerally in our soul, and yet which feel so removed from the hard barrenness of the physical world that entombs us. But if transits through Pisces help to bring this nostalgia to the surface, this part of us that makes us want to swim back into the womb of the past, I feel that it is performing a vital emotional function. It is encouraging us to grieve, because in our day-to-day lives, we leave very little room for grieving of any kind. There is so much emphasis placed on being practical, on being functional, on transcending human pettinesses so that we can carry on being a worthwhile and contributing member of the human race, that our emotions keep on being crushed down. We're told that we should always forever be angling our sights on that distant mountain where all our achievements are waiting to be fulfilled, whereas to give in to one's emotions is considered to be infantile, to be regressive. And yet nostalgia works because there is an inner child within us that never dies. There is a part of us that still lives within the womb and longs for that sense of security with an infinite, undying mother. A part of us that has overcome or not yet been introduced to the fears of death and mortality, and which can experience life with pure wholesomeness and innocence. People long for that feeling because it is so far removed from the careworn present that so many of us occupy. We long for that imaginary manifesto of seemingly simpler days. And it's not that life has ever really truly been simpler in the past. Life is complex by nature. It's just that in childhood, or in the imagined version of our childhood, we were not yet aware of those complexities, and so it's almost like they didn't exist, and we can just edit them out in the film studio of our recollection. But by revisiting these things, we are granted the emotional release of mourning for things that we may not have fully felt in the present. And I'm sure almost everyone watching this channel at the moment knows what it is to grieve and knows what it is to lose. And grief is not something that always arises in the immediacy of the moment. I can definitely say that many times when people close to me have died or have been removed from my life in a kind of relationship death, the grief has not always hit me there in the moment, usually because I'm just focused on surviving and trying to carry on existing in the pain and death throes of unchosen change. But it means that when we have those moments when there is a pause, when we can rest, that is when those memories sink back upon us. That's when suddenly those emotions that we couldn't give vent to at the time can explode in our chest in this weary outpouring of color that seems unprompted by anything and yet can be so strong that it is completely debilitating. I'm sure we've all at times felt that sorrow that has weighed so heavily upon us we could barely consider the idea of being able to get out of bed. We just want a safe space where we can nurse and nestle and snuggle with our sorrows. And giving vent to that pain, because we have to deny it so much, can be addictive, which is why many people love music or films or art or literature that is tragic, because it enables us to push that bruise that we know won't heal if we carry on pushing it. And yet the pain of it reminds us that we are alive in some kind of crucial way. But the two fishes, even though they seem to be pulling in different directions, they actually serve one another, because only by giving ourselves that period of grief and strange melancholy for the past can we actually have had enough emotional release that we can commit to the future. You know, it's a bit like sometimes when we finish a relationship and the pain of it ending hasn't quite hit in yet. And we think, no, I'm feeling strong, I'm feeling confident, I can throw myself into something new. And it's not until we're actually in that vulnerable situation with someone new who is so very different from the partner that we've lost that we can suddenly be aware of the dissonance between what we once had and what we no longer have now. It can be this trigger for finally inviting in things that we really wish we didn't have to face, but which we have to release if we want to move on. And once we've had a moment where we withdraw and we give in to those feelings of grief and we allow ourselves that emotional catharsis, then we can be ready for when Aries comes along and that new fish swims forward full of hope, full of belief, and full of all the overwhelming imaginings of how incredible the future can be. And I think this is why Pisces, besides being this realm of heartfelt remembering, is also the zone of forgetting and letting go. And it makes me think of how in many of these mythological traditions that believe in a reincarnation and metempsychosis and transmigration of the soul, there is usually this critical juncture that after the soul has been cleansed and bathed and washed away of all the past, one of the final things that happens to it before that soul is granted a new form, whatever it may take, it is given a quaff of the waters of Nepenthe, these waters of forgetting that give us this divine amnesia that temporarily rids us of all the recollection of our previous existence, so we can fully commit to the new form we are now entering without those ghosts of the past haunting us. And this is true also of when we undergo a psychological death and rebirth. At some point, there has to be a moment of forgetting, of no longer allowing all those ghosts of the past to crowd around us, whispering and singing in our ears, but a time where we banish them and exorcise them and see the future unmuddied by all of those wearisome echoes. Anyway, that video is mostly focusing on the mythological context of the sun's journey through Pisces as part of the grander cycle it goes through from the zodiac. I haven't really explored the characteristics of the sign, even if it involves the push and pull between those two different approaches to life. Perhaps I will talk about that more in a present video, but right now I was feeling inspired by that particular narrative, so I wanted to share it with you. If you have any of your own Piscean dreams and fantasies you want to share with me, if there's anyone here with Sun in Pisces or strong Pisces aspects or not, please comment and share your stories with me. If you want to get in contact, I will put my email below so you can message me, and likewise I also have a Patreon, so if you want to support this channel there will be a link there so that you are able to do so. Anyway, lots of love to you, and hopefully I will be more awake and alert next time we meet.